No, it was a big fanfare. Going to interview my parents and people who knew me, so it was big things on the television, 6 o'clock news and things like that.
So you knew it was going to be like a seminal moment in English football?
Yeah, of course I did, yeah. It was, I would say, a lot of pressure, but I just wanted to do well.
You're becoming a top player at a top club, and yet, in the 70s and 80s, a lot of racial tension. That's just not in the stands, that's also...
Viv Anderson's story carries moments of deep sadness, rooted in the relentless racial abuse he endured while breaking barriers in English football. As the first black player to represent England at the senior level, he often faced hostility from the stands, with chants and insults aimed directly at him. These experiences weighed heavily on him, especially during away matches where the atmosphere could turn cruel. Despite staying composed on the pitch, the emotional toll followed him home. He has often reflected on how isolating those early years felt. The constant need to stay strong became a burden as Anderson navigated a football culture that was slow to challenge racism. He absorbed abuse that many teammates never had to think about, forcing him to develop emotional armor well before his career truly blossomed. In interviews, he has shared how difficult it was to remain focused while hearing slurs rain down every week. Even moments of triumph were shadowed by the hostility that came with simply being visible. His breakthrough was historic, but it came with pain few fully understood at the time. Anderson also felt sadness in the lack of accountability during those decades, as authorities often ignored or minimized racist behavior. Stadiums lacked meaningful anti-racism measures, leaving players like him exposed and unsupported. He has spoken about the frustration of seeing offenders face little consequence, reinforcing the sense that his suffering was expected. This lack of action made every match unpredictable, not just competitively but emotionally. It shaped his understanding of how slowly institutions were willing to change. He frequently recalls how the abuse extended beyond matches, affecting his family and personal life. Loved ones who attended games sometimes witnessed the worst of the hostility, deepening his worry for their well-being. The idea that simply watching him play could expose them to hatred weighed on him heavily. These moments made the joy of football feel more complicated than it should have been. The sport he loved often placed the people he loved in difficult positions. Another sad chapter emerged later, when Anderson hoped to transition into management but found opportunities scarce for black coaches. He has openly expressed disappointment that, despite his experience and legacy, doors remained closed. This echoed the same systemic issues he faced as a player, only in a different form. The lack of representation in coaching highlighted how deeply the problem ran. His ambition to lead teams was repeatedly met with silence from clubs. Seeing younger generations of black players and aspiring managers face similar challenges added to his sense of sorrow. Anderson has noted that progress exists, but not nearly at the pace or depth required for meaningful change. Knowing that the path remains uneven for others mirrors his own struggles from decades earlier. This continuity of barriers reminded him that his achievements did not dismantle racism on their own. The persistence of these issues has been one of his greatest disappointments, yet the sadness in his story also comes from realizing that personal resilience was not enough to alter the system around him. Anderson often speaks of the emotional fatigue that came with constantly proving his worth in environments slow to accept him. His career is celebrated today, but the loneliness he felt during its hardest moments still lingers. He carries pride in breaking barriers, but also sorrow in knowing the cost. His reflections reveal a legacy shaped as much by pain as by triumph. Viv Anderson's experiences with racial abuse formed some of the darkest moments of his career, revealing the harsh reality black players faced in English football. He often found himself targeted by relentless chants that echoed around stadiums, creating an atmosphere meant to intimidate and belittle him. These insults were not isolated incidents but part of a weekly routine he had to face. For Anderson, stepping onto the pitch meant preparing for more than just football. It meant bracing himself against a crowd that didn't always welcome his presence. The abuse went far beyond words, becoming physical through the objects hurled in his direction. Bananas, apples, pears, and even a glass bottle were thrown from the stand in an attempt to demean and provoke him. Each incident served as a painful reminder of the hostility surrounding him during match. This wasn't just opposition banter, it was dehumanizing and dangerous. Yet he continued to play, even when the environment turned volatile. His perseverance became a testament to his strength. One of the moments that deeply affected him occurred at a match in Newcastle. The intensity of the abuse that day left him doubting his ability to continue. Feeling overwhelmed, he confided in his manager, Clough, saying he wasn't sure he could play under such conditions. Clough's sharp but supportive response urged him not to let abusers dictate his path. That conversation stuck with Anderson for years. It became a turning point in how he confronted adversity. Despite this support, Anderson has expressed sadness about how normalized racism was at the time. The abuse he faced was often dismissed as part of the game, leaving him with little protection or acknowledgement from officials. Teammates and fans who might have sympathized rarely had the power to intervene. This acceptance reflected a troubling climate for black players in the 1970s and 1980s. Anderson carried the emotional weight of that indifference throughout his career. The silence around him made the abuse feel even heavier. He has often spoken about how the normalization of racism forced players to endure things no one should ever face. To survive, he learned to internalize and push past insults that should have been condemned. This coping mechanism, though necessary, was emotionally draining. Anderson later admitted that the expected stoicism made it harder to speak publicly about his pain. The culture of just get on with it kept many issues hidden. His survival required resilience that shouldn't have been needed. These experiences shaped his view of the footballing world long after he retired from playing. They left scars that resurfaced whenever discussions about racism in sport emerged. Anderson carried the memories of hostile crowds and unpunished offenders into his post-playing reflections. He realized how much strength it took to perform under such pressure. His sadness grew from understanding that younger players might still walk similar paths. The past never fully stayed behind. As his playing days ended, Anderson hoped to channel his expertise into management. He believed his experience at the top levels of football would open doors. Instead, he found those doors firmly shut. The lack of opportunities for black coaches became one of his biggest disappointments. Despite his achievements, clubs showed little interest in offering him a managerial role. This reinforced the structural barriers he had battled throughout his career. 2 decades after he and Keith Alexander were among the very few black managers in English football, Anderson observed that little had changed. He expressed frustration at the sport's failure to create pathways for diverse leadership. This wasn't just about his own ambitions, it was about the message sent to future generations. For a game filled with black players, the absence of black voices in positions of power felt glaring. It highlighted a deeper issue within the sport's hierarchy. The lack of progress made him reflect on how racism had simply shifted form. Instead of chants from the stands, he now confronted silent exclusions behind closed doors. These barriers were less visible but just as damaging. Anderson often spoke about how painful it was to see talented black coaches overlooked. The disappointment ran deeper because he had once believed that the next generation would have it easier. Instead, they faced familiar struggles. His sadness over the state of coaching diversity grew as he witnessed repeated cycles of missed opportunities. Even as campaigns promoted equality, the actual representation remained low. Anderson pointed out that symbolic gestures were not enough if decision-makers stayed the same. His own experiences showed how systemic issues needed systemic solutions. The game he loved still had fractures that required healing. Without meaningful change, progress felt stagnant. A particularly personal moment of sorrow came with the loss of Cyril Regis in 2018. Regis was more than a fellow player, he was a pioneer, friend, and source of strength. His sudden passing deeply affected Anderson. He spoke emotionally about how Regis had helped pave the way for black footballers with dignity and courage. Losing someone who shared his battles felt like losing part of his own story. It was a reminder of how precious time truly is. Regis's death pushed Anderson to reflect more deeply on the journey they both endured. Together, they had faced abuse, challenged stereotypes, and reshaped English football. His passing brought back memories of the early days when they relied on each other for understanding. Anderson's sadness stemmed not only from the loss of a friend, but from the ending of a chapter in football history. It emphasized the fragility of life beyond the game. In interviews, Anderson spoke about how Regis's legacy inspired him to cherish every moment. The shock of losing someone so influential made him rethink the pace and priorities of life. It reminded him to appreciate the victories, no matter how small. His grief carried a message about valuing people while they are still present. That realization became one of the most profound lessons he shared publicly. Regis's memory continued to guide him. The emotional weight of balancing public expectations with private losses also shaped his reflections. Anderson often felt he needed to appear strong, even when carrying heavy burdens. Whether facing racism or mourning a friend, he rarely allowed himself visible vulnerability. But in later years he opened up more about these feelings. He acknowledged that speaking about sadness was part of healing. His honesty created space for others to do the same. Looking back, Anderson recognized how his experiences highlighted both progress and persistent gaps in the sport. He celebrated how far football had come in confronting racism, yet mourned how much remained unresolved. The past reminded him of what resilience demanded, but also of what support systems should have existed. His sadness came from knowing that change was possible but slow. Football's evolution still felt incomplete. True equality remained a work in progress through all the painful moments. Anderson understood that his story had become bigger than himself. His battles helped pave the way for players who followed. Still, he carried the emotional weight of knowing that every milestone came at a cost. The chants, The objects, the doubts, they all shaped his legacy. He wanted future generations to succeed without facing the same hostility. That hope became part of his sadness and his strength. Even today, Anderson's reflections reveal a man who endured more than the game should ever have demanded. His sadness is woven into the fabric of his achievements, reminding the world that pioneers often walk lonely roads. Yet he continues to speak out because silence once hurt him deeply. Sharing his experiences brings meaning to the pain he endured. It turns hardship into history that can guide the sport forward. Ultimately, Viv Anderson's journey is marked by both sorrow and resilience. His story exposes the harsh realities black players faced and the ongoing challenges in football's leadership structures. But it also highlights his determination to push forward, even when the world around him seemed unwilling to change. His sadness does not overshadow his legacy, it deepens it. Through his struggles, he became a symbol of courage, endurance, and the fight for equality in the sport he loves. Viv Anderson's story leaves us with a powerful reminder of the strength it takes to break barriers in a world unwilling to change quickly. His journey, filled with both triumph and pain, shows how resilience can shape history even when the odds feel impossible. Reflecting on his experiences reminds us that progress is never automatic, it must be fought for. Anderson's legacy continues to shine because he refused to let racism define his future. His courage still inspires generations of athletes striving for fairness and respect. As we look back on the hardships he endured, it becomes clear that Anderson's contributions go far beyond the football pitch. He helped shift the culture of the sport simply by standing firm in who he was. Every step he took helped open doors for players who might have otherwise been held back. His story encourages us to confront injustice wherever we see it. The game is better today because people like him refuse to stay silent. At the same time, Anderson's reflections remind us that challenges still remain. The lack of diversity in coaching and leadership shows how much work the sport still needs. Though his disappointment in this area pushes us to advocate for more equitable opportunities across all levels of football. Legacy is not just what someone achieved, but what their experiences urge us to improve. Anderson's journey calls us to stay committed to meaningful change. His resilience and honesty offer valuable lessons about confronting adversity head-on. Anderson's willingness to share his sadness and struggles helps others understand the emotional costs of being a pioneer. Through his openness, he turns pain into purpose, inspiring others to speak out and push forward. His story teaches us that every step toward progress is built on courage. The strength he showed continues to be a guiding light in discussions about equality in sport. Thank you for exploring this journey with us and keeping Anderson's legacy alive. If you found this story meaningful or inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and share to support more content like this. Your engagement helps bring important stories to a wider audience and ensures these conversations continue. Together, we can celebrate pioneers like Viv Anderson while working toward a more inclusive future in football and beyond.